all right. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Hoplite channel. I am your host, Hop. If you are here, you clicked on this video to see Samurai Lit Yagyu Munenori Part 2. And I appreciate you coming back, as always. Hope you enjoyed Part 1 of this famous samurai. And we're going to move now into Part 2. And we'll discuss more of his famous work, The Life-Giving Sword, and talk first upon his life in this small regard, what he did during his time in the employment of the Tokugawa shogunate, and as he inherited his art from his father, the Shinkage Ryu, Yagyu Shinkage Ryu, what it meant for him to be an advisor for the shogun, but also an instructor in the terms of the martial arts. We see that the latter part of his life, he was extremely influential for the shogun Iemitsu, and how it came to be that he found himself constantly in the court of Iemitsu, even though perhaps he had wished he could have retired at an earlier age. But anyway, let's begin a little further back. And we go to this particular battle, the Battle of Sekigahara. And this was around 1600 AD. It involved the Nobunaga, I believe, family versus the Tokugawa. And this was a war between the two families as to who would be the next shogun family in feudal Japan. And this happened on several occasions, but this feud was in particular pretty bloody and vicious. But Muneyoshi, Yagyu Muneyoshi, his allegiance to Tokugawa Iemitsu is what brought the Munenori and Muneyoshi paths into the Tokugawa shogunate. Muneyoshi, being loyal to Ieyasu, early on developed his Shinkage Ryu style. Tokugawa Iemitsu agreed to adopt it as one of the two arts, and his son Yagyu Munenori was at this particular battle in the employ of the shogun Tokugawa Iemitsu. And as I mentioned in part 1, he defended the shogun on several occasions and actually took part in a few pitched battles in the Battle of Sekigahara. And it's also rumored that the famous swordsman and samurai who I'll cover, as I said in the last part of this series, Miyamoto Musashi, he was also at this battle. Although around this time it's rumored that he only would have been 16 or 17 years old, whereas Munenori would have been by this time approaching 30. But in any event, it's rumored that both samurais were at this very important battle in Japanese history. They never met on the battlefield, of course, but it's rumored that they both took part in it. Which is interesting because after Ieyasu had won this battle and became shogun, Munenori was brought on by Ieyasu and Muneyoshi as well to teach the Yagyu Shinkage Ryu in the house of the shogunate, and to later become the instructor of the son of Ieyasu, Hidetada, and his son, Iemitsu. So, what happened? Well, Musashi became famous throughout the land as a samurai and sought to work in the Tokugawa shogunate after the family he was loyal to, the Nobunaga. I believe that's, again, I'm butchering these names, but Musashi later sought, after this victory, to become the sword instructor for the Tokugawa shogunate. But he was declined at this point, obviously, because Munenori had been brought on by Ieyasu and Hidetada for this purpose. But it's interesting is if Musashi and Munenori had worked for the same shogun in this same period, you would have had two of the most famous samurais working for the same shogun family, but it was not to be, which could have been for the best. But in any event, we go now to the Tokugawa Iemitsu, who was the grandson of Ieyasu, the son of Hidetada. And he ascended to the shogunate court as it was in in the latter half of Munenori's life, and he was only 20 years old when he became shogun. So he was quite young. He had a reputation of being very stubborn, you could say. He was insistent upon his orders being followed. He was very direct. He was impatient. But he also would listen to reason for people he respected. And Yagyu Munenori was one of these few people he greatly respected. And Munenori was the personal advisor and also a government official in the court of Tokugawa Iemitsu. And it was Munenori who lobbied, as I said earlier, that he recall Takuan Soho from exile. And it was Iemitsu who recalled Takuan Soho after 3 years, when Takuan had been banished by Iemitsu's father, Hidetada, for possibly getting too involved in the court politics of feudal Japan. And instead of being a monk, it was thought that he was becoming a political monk, if there's such a thing. But Munenori lobbied Iemitsu to bring him back, and Iemitsu brought Takuan back. And as I said in part one, Iemitsu would listen to Munenori and Soho speak with each other and discuss Bushido and Zen. And it was here in this period that Zen Buddhism became central to Munenori's life, especially in his teachings of Iemitsu, because, as I said, Iemitsu was very impatient and always thought he was destined for something better, and was extremely demanding upon those who worked for him. And Munenori was no exception to this. He would constantly be asking Munenori for more advice, for asking for more lessons in swordsmanship. And it was said after Munenori had eventually passed that Iemitsu would often remark to his aides, "I wish Yagyu Munenori was here, I would ask him about this." Or, "It's a shame Munenori isn't here, I would like to discuss this with him." He would make these remarks and would long for his teacher, because at the age of 20, to have a man like Munenori at his beck and call as an instructor, as an advisor, as a mentor, he became like his father in certain ways. So this was trying for Munenori, because in his older age, you could tell he definitely wanted to retire to his village where he was daimyo, and just to live out, the rest of his life in peace. But this was not to be the case. Once you are in the Tokugawa family, I guess you're in for life, because he was not given much rest. And this was the curse of being a famous samurai and a brilliant mind, was that you were in very high demand and constant demand. So speaking of that brilliant mind, we'll turn now to some readings in the Life-Giving Sword, Munenori's work that he wrote in 1632. And I will provide a read along once again for you to follow. Okay, we will jump right in, and we will go to page 94. And Yagyu Munenori said, the priest Chung Feng said, "Maintain the mind that releases the mind." This saying has two levels of meaning. The practice of the first is as follows: if you release the mind, do not allow it to become fixated when it reaches its destination, but unfailingly make it return. If you strike once with your sword, do not let your mind stop at that strike, but bring your mind back securely to yourself. The deeper meaning is, in releasing the mind, you let it go where it wishes. Releasing the mind means letting it go and not letting to stop anywhere. Maintaining the mind that releases the mind means exactly that. For if the mind is released and always brought back as if in a net, it will not be free. The mind that releases the mind is one that is let go and does not stop. If you maintain such a released mind, your movements will be free. Even dogs and cats are better raised unleashed. A leashed dog or a leashed cat cannot be raised well. Okay, what's he saying there? Well, if we remember back to his mentor's writings, Takuan Soho's The Unfettered Mind, this is the same lesson he is trying to impart to the reader that Takuan was trying to impart to him, in that the abiding mind, the mind that stops at one place, the mind that lets itself become comfortable in what it has achieved or what it seeks to achieve or what it sees or what it feels and freezes in this moment, that is the moment where it is defeated. And there's a famous story about Yagyu Munenori in the court of Tokugawa Iemitsu. And the story goes that the Tokugawa Iemitsu invited Munenori to come see a play at the shogun's court one evening. And as Munenori entered, the shogun ushered over to Munenori to sit next to him. And of course he did. And as Munenori sat down, the shogun leaned over and said, "One of the actors in this play we're about to watch is supposed to be the best theater actor in Japan." I can't remember his name, but he said to Munenori, "As we watch, he is going to perform an act, and it will be in a dance. It's considered one of the hardest parts of the play. Tell me later if you can see any moment where he breaks his concentration and you could defeat him if he were a samurai." Munenori nodded and agreed. And the play went on. And the actors did their parts. And this one particular actor was so good that the performance he put on got a very strong ovation from everyone. And as he walked away, he walked into the dressing room, finished. And before he did so, though, as he was crossing the last pillar, he let out a deep sigh of relief. And he went into the dressing room, and he was just covered in sweat from the labor of it all. And someone was asking him, "That was incredible. They're applauding your performance. How did you do it?" He's like, "Well, I had to concentrate the best I could, and I had to make every line, every step in the dance count." I also noticed there was one man in the audience, and I never felt his eyes leave me. It was as though he was studying my every move. Of everyone in the crowd, I could feel his eyes, and at no moment do I think he left me without his gaze following. And he said, "Do you know who this man was?" He's like, "Who was it?" "It was the man next to the shogun." Like, "Oh, that's the samurai Yagyu Munenori." He's like, "Oh, that's incredible. I'll have to meet him later." And meanwhile, back at the palace, the shogun turned to Munenori and said, "Did you see a moment? Where would you have struck him down?" And Munenori said, "He is incredible. He's an incredible actor. He's among the best I've ever seen. Through the whole play, he never once broke his concentration. His steps were deliberate. His mind was in free flow. They never abided in one place. Except the moment he walked off stage, I saw him let out a breath of relief, and it was there I would have cut him down." And supposedly the story got back to the actor, and the actor met with Munenori later and said, I heard that was where you would have struck me down. And Munenori said, "Well, it's true that this is where I saw your concentration break for one moment, was the moment you had just walked off stage." And he said, it is true that I definitely exhaled, believing I had finished my routine. And Munenori said, "Well, it is always at the end, right before we believe we have achieved success, that we are most vulnerable to failure." And he said, "In your art, the stage is where life ends, but where a samurai's life ends is the grave. And if he is to exhale and to let himself believe he has achieved what is victory, it is at that moment, at that precise point where he sees victory, and it is one step away, that he is his most vulnerable and where he can be cut down." And that was an interesting story where both of these men, masters of their craft, Yagyu first being a samurai with his Bushido, and this actor being a master of his art in dance and in theater, they both respected each other, and they both knew they were correct. But it just goes to show that he believed in this Zen Buddhism understanding of the abiding place being the place where the mind stops, where we believe we've achieved what we set out to achieve, where we think that this is the end and we've reached the goal. But the free-flowing mind that understands the goal is to never stop in that abiding place, that is the mind that is enlightened, that will succeed no matter what it tries to do. Okay, next reading. We go to page 109. And Yagyu Munenori said, If you strike with your sword and think, I've struck, the mind that thinks I've struck will stop right there, just as it is. Because your mind does not return from the place you struck, you will be distracted, struck by the second blow of your opponent, and your initiative will be brought to nothing. The significance of returning your mind is not to stop your mind where you struck, but to pull it back forcibly to your own self. In its ultimate state of mind, it is in not returning your mind at all, but in unrelentingly striking a second and third time without allowing your opponent so much as a shake of the head. This is what is called having no space to slip in a single hair. Between your first and second blow, there should be no interval that would allow in even a single hair. This is the mind with which you hit and hit again. Okay. As I was just saying in that story between the conversation between Shogunate Iemitsu and Yagyu Munenori, where did you see his concentration break? Was there any moment in the dance, if you were both samurai, you could have taken the advantage and struck him down? And he said, through the whole dance, the artist's performance was perfect. But I smiled just briefly, and he saw me smile at that moment when he crossed the first pillar towards the offstage, and I saw him breathe a sigh of relief. This mind must never let in a single hair's breadth. The sword that sees this moment will strike and will strike and will strike again. This repetition to not let even one moment of a single hair's breadth enter into his mind that flows from one movement to the next, that flows from one stance, one motion, one defense, one parry, one strike again. This is the mind that will not abide in one place. And as he says there, you must not let in one hair's breadth, because in that one hair's breadth, where that actor breathed that sigh of relief, that is where Munenori said he would have struck and cut him down. Okay, last reading. This is on page 116. And Yagyu Munenori said, "It is the very mind itself that leads the mind astray. Of that mind, do not be unmindful." This speaks about truth and delusion. Our minds contain both the original mind and the distracted or deluded mind. If you obtain the original mind and are able to conduct yourself in accordance with it, everything will be straightforward and right. But if this original mind is covered over, distorted, and sullied by the deluded mind, everything you do will be distorted and soiled. In a case where wrong is converted into principle, and all of this is a mind that wells up from our impetuous physical bodies according to the moment, this is called the deluded or distracted mind. When this occurs, the original mind is hidden and becomes the deluded mind, and nothing but undesirable events are manifested. Okay, so where have we heard that quote before? It is the mind itself that leads the mind astray. Of that, do not be unmindful. Well, he lifted that directly from Takuan Soho. So Soho wrote this in The Unfettered Mind, and Munenori more or less plagiarized it. He changed the words slightly, but he didn't. I don't think he listed his friend in the citations there as far as the quoted sources, but that's directly from Takuan Soho's Unfettered Mind, where it is the mind that will delude the mind. You are in control of everything up here, as we said in Stoicism. There is the external world you can't control, and there is the world you can control within your power. This is the original mind. This is the mind that must not be led astray by the deluded mind. You must not let your mind believe you control outside forces that are without your control. You must always return to your original mind. And he says here, the deluded mind can be distracted, and it wells up from our impetuous physical bodies. This is when you are aroused to anger or jealousy, or when you are raging for the fact that someone insulted you or failed to recognize your greatness and gave you offense by not showing proper respect. This deluded mind will cloud the original mind, and it will cover it, as he says. Similar to like if you took a cloth and you covered up a light, it will stifle that light. But you must always return to your original mind and never let the deluded mind that throws the cloak over that light take over. And you must return to your original mind so that you can avoid undesirable events that will be manifested from this covering of the original mind. So that's very Zen, but it's also very Stoic. So I think you could say the overlap of the two disciplines of Stoicism, of Bushido, and of Zen Buddhism, that quote probably does the best job of describing what all of those philosophies together are trying to get at. Okay. I appreciate you guys staying around for this one if you're still here. This was Yagyu Munenori Part 2. I'll wrap him up with Part 3. It'll probably be pretty brief. There's a couple more readings from the Life-Giving Sword that are worth going over. But these first two parts, we covered the lion's share of the readings from the Life-Giving Sword that I thought were definitely worthwhile talking about. But in any event, I definitely want to see you back here for Part 3 for Yagyu, and then we'll move into the Samurai Literature series towards another book. I think I'll do the Demon Sermon on the martial arts, which is a good one. Not as famous as the Life-Giving Sword, the Book of the Five Rings, but the Demon Sermon is very cool. But anyway, once again, appreciate you coming. And if you're liking this, give it a thumbs up. If you give it a subscribe, even better. And if you share it with friends and family who might get some value out of it, that's great too. Anyway, we'll see you next time for Part 3 of Yagyu Munenori. Till then, take it easy.